If you're watching this on the Prepper Historian, here's your 1-minute hook, so don't go anywhere. During the Cold War, the United States faced a brutal problem. How do you power remote Arctic radar stations, places so isolated that even aircraft resupply was risky, and where temperatures could kill a man in minutes? Batteries froze. Diesel thickened. Wind was worthless in calm polar air. Solar, useless for half the year. Yet one device quietly kept these outposts alive. It worked without sunlight, without wind, without heat, without mechanics, and it ran for decades. Hardly anyone outside military and engineering circles even knows how it really worked. And as a prepper or historian, understanding this device gives you insight into a forgotten technology that still has practical lessons today. Before we jump in, subscribe to the channel so you never miss deep dive historical breakdowns like this. Now let's get into the technology that kept the Arctic Watch alive, the RTG, Radioisotope Thermoelectric Generator. Why the Cold War forced the invention of nuclear battery generators. The United States and Canada built the Distant Early Warning Line, the DEW line, to detect Soviet bombers coming over the pole. These stations had to operate year-round, often unmanned, sitting on frozen coastlines or barren islands. The military needed a power source that didn't require constant maintenance, didn't depend on fuel deliveries, and didn't freeze solid. In other words, they needed something steady, silent, and incredibly durable. That's where the RTG came in. It didn't generate power in the way most people think. There were no spinning parts, no burning fuel, and no complex systems waiting to fail. Instead, the magic was in heat. Steady, reliable heat produced by the natural decay of a radioactive isotope, usually strontium-90 or plutonium-238. That heat passed through thermocouples, which converted the temperature difference directly into electricity. No moving pieces meant almost nothing could break. Let's talk about how an RTG actually worked in the unforgiving Arctic. The simplest way to understand it is this. Radioactive isotopes decay. That decay produces heat. Engineers, would capture that heat and push it across metal junctions that create voltage. The hotter one side is compared to the cold Arctic environment, the more electricity the device makes. Interestingly, the extreme cold of the far north wasn't a problem. It was a strength, because the RTG relied on that temperature difference. RTGs used in Arctic stations typically produced between 10 and 60 watts of continuous power. Now, that may sound small, but for early warning sensors, weather instruments or communications relay points, it was perfect. And because decay happens constantly, an RTG could provide power for decades without human attention. Some built in the 1960s were still warm and generating current in the 1990s. If you're a survivalist, just think of the appeal. A battery that never needs charging, never freezes, and doesn't depend on weather. The Cold War engineers weren't thinking about preppers, but they solved one of our biggest modern off-grid challenges. Why did the military trust a nuclear heater instead of a traditional power source? In a world full of backup generators, you might wonder, why choose something as, unusual as an RTG? The answer, really, lies in logistics. The dew line stretched for thousands of miles, and, honestly, some stations were so remote that even helicopters struggled to reach them. If a generator happened to break in February, the crew might not arrive until, say, June. The RTG, though, removed that risk altogether. Its outer casing was built like a miniature fortress. Dense steel, heavy shielding, ceramic layers, and shock-absorbing structures. It could survive aircraft crashes, fires, and even being submerged in icy seawater. For historians, this is really one of those forgotten engineering marvels that reveals the true intensity of Cold War planning. The military prepared for uninterrupted surveillance at the literal edge of the world, and, well, they trusted a nuclear heater to do the job. While civilians can't buy an RTG, nor should they, the principles behind the technology still guide smart off-grid strategy. One of the biggest takeaways is redundancy without dependence on consumables. The RTG solved the core Arctic problem by removing logistics from the equation. For a modern survivalist, applying this principle might look like designing systems that rely on abundant environmental factors rather than constant resupply. For example, instead of fuel-dependent heat, many off-grid cabins now combine passive solar heating with thermal mass storage. Instead of diesel generators, they use microhydro if a steady stream is available. The Cold War lesson here is simple. Choose power sources that require little or no human intervention and can survive the environment they're in. Another practical example: hardening your power system. RTGs were built to endure catastrophic impact. For preppers, that might mean mounting solar panels on protected frames, burying battery banks below frost level, or wiring equipment inside EMP-resistant enclosures. The mindset is identical to the engineers who designed RTGs. Assume the worst conditions and build so the system keeps running anyway. RTGs weren't without issues. Abandoned units became hazards when Arctic coasts eroded or when early sites were decommissioned without proper cleanup. In several cases, local communities discovered units decades later, still warm, still radioactive, and often partially buried in ice. This sparked international recovery operations in the 1990s and 2000s. For historians, this clean-up effort is a reminder that Cold War technology rarely ends with the Cold War. It leaves footprints, sometimes literally glowing ones, for future generations to manage. RTGs are a window into Cold War strategy, Arctic logistics, nuclear engineering, and long-term off-grid problem-solving. The military learned that remote installations need systems that are as tough as the environment around them, and survivalists can apply that same thinking in small, practical ways. If you're setting up a remote cabin, the lesson isn't go nuclear. It's build power you don't have to babysit. If you're studying Cold War infrastructure, RTGs are an overlooked chapter that reveal how seriously the superpowers took the polar front. And if you're just here to deepen your understanding of forgotten technologies, this device shows how creativity thrives when the stakes are high. Thanks for reading, and if you want more deep historical dives like this, make sure you subscribe, share this guide, and keep exploring the past with us.